this type of question is what we call a parallel method of reasoning question. The question stem reads, which one of the following arguments is most similar in its reasoning to the argument above? So there's an argument above, which is this. We encountered this type of question in question 2 from this section about the dogs and stuff. But the idea is that here we have this argument, which partakes of a very general argument form. And our job is to figure out what form that is and see if any one of these answer choices also contains an argument that partakes of the same form. So it's a really tough question. You can see it's incredibly long. I mean, just do a simple word count on this. This is probably like double the word count of some other questions. So this is a quite time-consuming question, but you have to know how to approach this question and get through it very quickly. And obviously, we're not going to be able to do that here because I have to explain, what is exactly wrong with it. But I'll try my best to comment on the quick thought process that's happening as the clock is ticking while trying to explain this question. So let's read the stimulus first. Suppose I have a promise to keep a confidence, and someone asks me a question I cannot answer truthfully without thereby breaking the promise. Okay, so let's pretend you're in high school. Your best friend decides to skip school today and go see a movie instead, and you promise, is making you promise that do not tell the teacher that I'm doing this. And you're like, okay, you're my best friend, I promise. And then the teacher, grabs you, takes you to the side and asks you point blank, tell me the truth. Where's your friend? So what do? You can keep your promise to your friend and then not be truthful and lie to your teacher. Oh, he's sick. Or you can be truthful to teacher. Actually, he's at the movies. But then if you do that, you break your promise. So obviously, you cannot keep and break the promise and keep and break the same promise. Or of course you can. Either keep it or break it. You can't do both. So therefore, one cannot be obliged both to answer all questions truthfully and to keep all promises. Yeah, very good. They're saying in one particular instance of A and one particular instance of B contradict. A is keeping a promise, B is telling the truth. Therefore, for the whole class of things called A and the whole class of things called B, all promises and all instance of telling the truth, there's no way that you can always do both. Because why should I believe this conclusion? Because here's one example where they are in conflict. So you cannot be obliged to both answer all questions truthfully and keep all promises. It's a very, very good argument. It's a valid argument, in fact. When these premises are true, this conclusion must be true. So we need to parallel this, talk about some other A that sometimes is in conflict with some other B, and then from those premises conclude that we cannot do all A and all B at the same time. They're inconsistent with each other. Let's take a look at answer choice A. It is claimed that we have the unencumbered right to say whatever we want. So A is unencumbered right to say whatever we want. It is also claimed that we have an obligation to be civil to others. So we have a right, unencumbered right, and an obligation to be civil. So this is the B. Now, what we need is one instance, right? This is where you start. So the quick way, as I'm reading this, as the clock is ticking, I'm reading this first sentence. I'm trying to match it already. Every sentence you're trying to match. And as I'm matching this, I know that this is A and B. Next thing you do is you anticipate what it has to say in order to be right. Because if you don't have that sense of anticipation of what it should say to be right, then you're just going to get bombarded with all this information. You might get confused and then just end up wasting time. So I see this A and B. A is unencumbered right to say whatever I want. I see B says obligation to be civil. I'm thinking to myself, the next thing that they have to talk about has to be instances or one specific instance where this thing is in conflict with this thing, where the unencumbered right to say whatever we want and the obligation to be civil you can't have both. Let's see if that's what it says. But civility requires that we not always say what we want. There you go. Civility requires that sometimes you don't say whatever you want. So, and the conclusion, so now we establish this one conflict. The conclusion has to be you can't have both. It cannot be true that both we have the unencumbered right to say whatever we want and that we have the duty to be civil. Very, very good. You see, it matches very well. From a conflict, we conclude that you can't have both things. B says, some politicians could attain popularity. So given that this is a very long question, I know you're very tempted to just sort of move on to the next one. You really shouldn't do that unless you're very, very advanced. I mean, even when I take new prep tests now, I still look at the others because you're human. You're prone to make errors. Everyone is. So there is a chance that you actually misread something. So this didn't match as well as you thought it did, which maybe reading the right answer choice will throw a flag and say, hey, wait a second, D also sounds really good. What's going on? Right? Maybe, and then it'll cause you to read. So that's why you read the others. Of course, having said that, the reality of the situation is that if I choose A and I'm sure it's A, I read the rest very quickly. So B says some politicians could attain popularity with voters only by making extravagant promises. Okay, this, however, would deceive the people. Okay, so, and since the only way, blah, blah, blah. But see, I'm looking for this A, B. I'm looking for, you got this thing, but A and B sometimes are in conflict, so you can't have both. But then that's not what. So I mean, the conclusion is some politician must deceive. Okay, great, go for it. Deceive. So yeah, not worth our time to consider anymore. C says if we put a lot of effort into making this report look good, then the client may think that we did so because we are insecure about the merits of our proposal. So that's if we put a lot of effort into making it look good. On the other hand, if we don't try to make it look good, the client might just think we're not serious about our business. So if we do A, then we're screwed. And if we do not A, then we're also screwed. So the conclusion is we're screwed, right? So whatever we do, we risk our credit. Yeah, great. This is a great argument. But you see how in form, it is not like the argument in stimulus, right? You see, in form is not. I mean, we can. It's good practice to try to make this argument in form like this argument. It's very good practice. Let's do it. It's how you get better at. It's how you get more familiar with the language of abstract forms of arguments. So I can say something like, if I promise my friend that I will lie for them, then I'm a bad person. But if I don't promise my friend that I will lie to them, then I'm not honoring our friendship, so I am also a bad person. So whatever I do, I'll be a bad person. See, that would be an argument here that matches this argument here. But as it stands, you can see that they don't match. D says, if creditors have legitimate claims against business and the business is a resource to pay those debts, then this business is obliged. Okay? So the claim is legitimate. You do actually owe this bank money, let's say, and this business does have the money to pay it, then the business should pay it. So also, if a business has obligation to pay it, then a court will enforce it to pay it. All right. So if this is met, then the courts will also be on the creditor side, say the bank's side, not your side. But courts do not force this business to pay its debt. Well, then yeah. Well, look at this statement right here. If a business has obligation to pay debt, then the court will force it to pay the debt. But the court did not force this business to pay debt, then it must mean that this business doesn't have an obligation to pay debt. Right? If this and now this pushes back over here. If the business doesn't have an obligation to pay debt, then either the claims are not legitimate or the business doesn't have the resources. So either the creditors don't have legitimate claims or the business doesn't have sufficient resource. Very, very good argument. Right? Very, very good argument. We learn from our conditional logic lessons. This argument takes of the form if A and B, then C. If C, then D. Not D. Not D. See, not D. Well, if not D, then you can't have C. And if you can't have C, then it must be not A or not B. This right here is like this 20-second thing summons like, I don't know, 10 hours of lessons on conditional logic. So don't worry if you don't follow it. But this is the form of this argument. They very well could use this as a stimulus and make you parallel this. But, as we can see, our stimulus doesn't have anywhere close to this form. So D is not right. E says if we extend our business hours, we'll either have to hire new employees or have existing employees work overtime. So if we decide to, become a 24-hour store, then either have to hire new people or have our existing people work overtime. But both new employees and additional overtime would increase our labor costs. Sure, yeah, we have to pay, new employees or pay people overtime. We cannot afford to increase labor costs, so we have to keep them as they are. Sounds like sound business, advice, but it just doesn't, right? It doesn't match. If we want to do this, right? If we want to do A, then we have to do either B or C. Right? If we want to extend our business, we have to hire new or pay overtime. But if we do either B or C, then D will happen, which is we will increase our labor costs. But we can't afford to do that, so therefore we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do this, which means then we're not going to do A. So again, logic, argument structure represented in logic, but it just doesn't match this argument structure.